It's time now to take a look at this Friday's newspapers around the world, and for that I'm joined by our press reviewer, Elena Casas. Elena, thanks very much.
Hello again, Lorna.
Indeed, for being with us. So we're going to start in Croatia, first of all, of course, with that news from the Balkans of Ratko Mladic's arrest and indeed his trial that starts today. He's appearing in court today, isn't he? So what have they got to say?
Yes, we're starting with a paper called the Veselni's List. I should probably apologise for that pronunciation if there's anyone watching who speaks Croatian, but there we go. The paper says it's spoken to sources within the Serbian police who say that Ratko Mladic can't possibly have been arrested at his cousin's home in Lazarevo, which is, you know, the story that we've been reporting, what the Serbian police have said. But they're anonymous sources. This obviously is completely unconfirmable information. The paper is based on anonymous sources. We don't have evidence for any of this. But they say that he's been in negotiations with Serbian authorities who knew where he was for years, and he's finally agreed to give himself up in exchange, they say, for a military pension that's going to be given to his family in Serbia. The paper alleges that British, French and German authorities were aware of this and involved in the negotiations, and that Mladic was dissuaded from committing suicide by Serbian police when they told him that if he went to the International Criminal Court, he could portray himself as a victim of an international injustice and go down in legend as a Serbian hero, if you like, the paper says, rather than dying alone on the run in the Serbian village.
Oh, so some very controversial claims there, certainly. In Germany, let's move on to the story about E. coli, which is still very much hitting the headlines, as we've already seen in the French papers as well.
Yes, and of course we've seen both in the German press and in the Spanish press and the rest of this week, of course, quite strong attacks of one country against the other after Germany accused Spain of bringing the disease, or rather exporting the disease to Germany and its cucumbers, which of course now turned out to be innocent. So according to Die Welt today, the two countries are starting to kiss and make up. They say that Angela Merkel and José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero talked on the phone this morning, and Merkel has apologised for the German authorities accusing those innocent Spanish cucumbers, and the two of them will be making a joint approach to Brussels to try and ask them to compensate the Spanish farmers who have, of course, already lost millions in lost exports now that no one wants to eat Spanish-produced salad vegetables. The interesting thing about that is, of course, the paper says they will be going together to ask Brussels for that compensation money. Other papers, including French papers we looked at this morning, have suggested that maybe it should be Berlin that compensates those Spanish farmers, seeing as it was the German government's allegations that mean that they've lost all of this money.
OK, well, that one will certainly run and run. Let's move on now to a drugs policy conference. We were talking about that yesterday. That's taking place in New York and calling for legalisation of some drugs. That was on the front page of Libération, as we saw earlier. And also it's hit the front page of The Independent in the UK.
Yeah, quite a punchy front page in The Independent, as they often have. We've got former EU Foreign Policy Supremo Javier Solano, Kofi Annan and a former US Secretary of State on the front page. What do they all have in common? They were all at this conference yesterday in New York, and they're all calling for legalisation, including of hard drugs like ecstasy and cannabis. Now, this might seem like a pretty controversial move, but they argue that the no-tolerance drugs policy that's been implemented recently has become a total disaster and has had a particularly hard impact on Latin American countries like Brazil, Colombia, and especially Mexico. So if we go to a Mexican paper now, I've got a piece from Proceso, which is a Mexican paper, which is written by a poet called Javier Siciliana, who's extremely famous in Mexico and has become a figurehead for this civil society movement. His son was killed by drug traffickers recently, and since then he's had a kind of political turnaround. And of course, this is a country which has been hugely affected by drug trafficking. 40,000 people killed since December 2006. Government has carried out a very no-tolerance policy, sent lots of soldiers to try and deal with the problem. That's been a disaster because a lot of them have been corrupted, and the drug traffickers just have more money, and so a lot of them have become the traffickers' shock troops. So Siciliano is making a real appeal for Mexican citizens to get their dignity back. If the government is so corrupt in large parts of the country that the drug traffickers can simply buy them out, or they're just too fragile to fight the drug traffickers, he says Mexico needs a civil society movement to rise up and take back their country, and he's organising a big march which is going to start tomorrow from Cuernavaca, south of Mexico City. He's gathering thousands of people, civil society organisations, charities, victims of traffickers, and they're going to march all the way from the city all the way up to the border at Ciudad Juarez to try and that's a week-long protest march to try and attract attention to this ongoing story.
OK, well, that's a really interesting look at the Mexican response to those drugs proposals. Thank you very much indeed, Elena, for that look at all today's international newspapers.